вечер и добре дошли скъпи гости. Надяваме се, че сте се настанили удобно и след оживения трафик и трупаната умора, може би, в края на работната седмица, сте готови за още едно, може би, вълнуващо, във всеки случай обогатяващо преживяване. Ваш домакин тази вечер е Международната школа на Златния розенкройцер. Темата на събитието е озаглавена „Мистерийната школа в ерата на Водолея“. В епохата на информационните технологии на много хора е известно, че в хода на времената по нашите земи и на много други места по света велики посветени са отключвали портите към могъщи фокуси на божествената любовна сила. По-малко известно е, че ученията в тези центрове на мъдростта, наричани мистерийни школи, се различават само външно. Според своята същност те са едно и имат една задача – осъществяването на Божия план за света и човечеството. Затова, погледнато от една по-дълбока гледна точка, може да се каже, и ние говорим за едно универсално учение и една школа. Мистерийната школа се изявява в материята периодично. Това се налага, тъй като в този свят всяка форма е подвластна на закона за раждане, разцвет и упадък. Това налага духовният импулс отново и отново, като една птица Феникс, да се възражда. Мистерийната школа се изявява винаги по план, в подходящо за нейната задача време, и работата е в съответствие с състоянието на съзнание на човечеството и на неговото развитие в света. Защо е необходима мистерийна школа? В Библията се казва: Божието царство е по-близо от вашите ръце и крака. Да, това е така. То е винаги навсякъде, то е тук и сега, то е вътре в нас. Но на човека му липсва подходящ апарат, с който да го възприеме и с който да участва в него. За да може това да стане, човекът трябва да се промени фундаментално. Мистерийната школа е фокус на зовящите, подкрепящи и закрилящи божествени сили, които осъществяват тази вътрешна промяна в човека. Промяната, разбира се, не е автоматична. Тя не се случва без съзнателното участие на човешкото същество. Затова днес отново сме призовани да осъществим себе си чрез процеса, който в Библията е наречен новораждане от вода и дух. Новото време на Водолея е особено подходящо за духовно-душевно развитие и възход на човечеството. Всичко необходимо за свещената себереализация е подготвено. Съкровищницата на светлината, за чието богатство са допринесли и нашите велики предци, като Орфей, Боян Мага, Петър Дънов и други знайни и незнайни, е на наше разположение. Да се отворим за нейните богатства, за нейните дарове, зависи само от нас. Надяваме се тази вечер да се срещнем сърце с сърце и на базата на тази отвореност всеки от нас да постигне една по-голяма дълбочина на собствената си визия за живота, за света и за човечеството. Нека да си пожелаем тази среща да бъде подкрепа и вдъхновение за всички онези, които с огнеж вървят по вътрешния път. Водещ на това събитие е нашия специален гост Яцек Запасник, представител на школата на Златния розенкройцер. Негов помощник, тъй като господин Запасник не говори български език, тази вечер ще бъде Тончо Динев. Сега ви оставям в добри ръце. Благодаря за вниманието.
Good evening, and it's marvelous to be here in Sofia and in Bulgaria. We're talking this evening about mystery schools. So we're talking about fundamental change in each one of us. And just now, our friend Katya, in her introductory words, referred to certain historical and spiritual references. So when she talked of the Orphaic tradition, we find ourselves here in Bulgaria with Orpheus. She said that I didn't speak Bulgarian, but I understand a bit of Bulgarian. And I think she didn't mention the Bogomil, because the Bogomil tradition as a Gnostic movement had an enormous effect on the whole of European civilization. It had an effect on a brotherhood in the south of France, where I live. This was the Cathar Brotherhood. And there was a link between the Bogomil, who traveled across the whole of Europe and could also initiate the groups that were in the south of France. These matters you can find in books or also in the internet. And the question we're asking ourselves today, as is written here, and apologies that it is in English, is a spiritual path possible in today's life? So we have a few words here which can help us in our exchange. Spiritual path today. So let us not look back so far in history, but let us look at more recent history. Because also during our lives and in the last generations, we had persons who are linked to that universal spiritual path. We can talk certainly about Peter Dönhoff. And here you see a number of photographs of persons who had an enormous spiritual impact, not only in Europe, but on other continents. The Theosophical movement was inspired by someone like Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, which had an immense influence in breaking the darkness of the 19th century. Because we know that in the past centuries, there was no opening, spiritual opening. We saw for hundreds of years the impact of the Inquisition. So therefore, monopolies of religions, which do not and did not allow for free thought. And so, and maybe you're a bit surprised when I say this, but Karl Marx was quite right to talk about religion as the opium of the people. And he was also active in that period in Europe. Not a revolutionary, a bourgeois philosopher who sat and projected possibilities and developments in Europe's development. And then we have someone like Rudolf Steiner, who created also the anthroposophical movement, again, which has an enormous influence in the cultural development in Europe. The photograph on the left at the bottom is of Max Heindel, who created the Rosicrucian Fellowship. And he was Danish, and then his life took him to the United States. So when we talk of Blavatsky with Theosophy, Steiner with Anthroposophy, and Max Heindel with his Rosicrucian Fellowship, we see three enormous figures who break through the darkness into the 20th century. And in this period, so we're going back nearly 100 years, in Holland, a man called Jan Lehner, who is the one on the right here, at the top of the right, with his brother Wim Lehner, coming out of Protestantism, attracted by theosophy, recognizing anthroposophy, became active in the Rosicrucian Fellowship, but felt that they had to take a step further. They had to take a step further from philosophy, a cosmic view of the world, to practice. And so this is why we are asking ourselves the question, is the spiritual path possible today or not? And we hope that during this evening you will find the answer. And we will also contribute to our discussion with an answer at the end of the presentation. So what we need to do is to look at today's life. Everything is moving at an incredible speed. Do you have time to think independently? Are you free from your telephone at this very moment? Or are you continually linking your thinking and experiencing through the mass media? Most who work are in a daily struggle, and in our civilized world, so to speak, hours are spent to satisfy our physical needs, and we meet every day the difficulties and obstacles of our life. So how do we manage? What are the roads people find, or paths they try to find? One is becoming a work alcoholic, and there are millions of people like that who are caught up in their daily work, getting a lot of money, but completely prisoners to their professional activities. Others may look for an ideal, for love in intense relationships. Others are looking for it in technology, are looking for it in science. They also look for it in religiosity, or they think they come into another level of consciousness by taking external stimulants. So, like drugs, like alcohol, and so on. And there are many young people today who ask themselves the question, where do I turn to? What is the answer in my life and for my life? And what we would like to do now is to make a proposal that when we talk of a spiritual path, we talk of an internal reality. So a path, a spiritual path, is not something external. And when one says external, it doesn't mean the development of the self. It doesn't mean the development of the ego. Because if we look at all the difficulties and tensions in life, it is the egocentric life that creates all the problems. So if you have come to the Golden Rosy Cross to get more for yourself, to satisfy your personality and your ambitions, I'm sorry, but you've come to the wrong address. But having said that, we would like to stress that every human being has the potential to be reborn of the divine being. Every human being carries the light in himself, in herself, but is unaware of it for most of the time, or projects into the outside, thinking that's where he or she will find eternity. This may lead to a change in our life if we realize that the divine is not to be found either outside of ourselves or after death, because it is a process of going into oneself through self self-knowledge.
Чрез себепознание.
Self-knowledge to begin. We are not experts in Latin, and I apologize for putting these 3 sentences in Latin, but there's a reason. The reason for that is that the Rosicrucian tradition goes back to the 17th century. And the classical Rosicrucians use these 3 terms. And the first is to be born of God, which means that every human being can experience the fact of being in and of God. And we can discuss that if you so wish. The second is in Jesu morimur, which means we die in Jesus. And that may immediately create an image in you. Aha, Jesus, history 2,000 years ago, and so on. And maybe then you say, so it's a religion. We say no. And why do we say no? Because we're talking about the birth of that inner soul which is in the center of our being, and that is that Jesus force. And so we can also talk about the mustard seed, the very, very small seed that is to be found in the very center of our being. We can talk of the lotus, of the flower of the lotus that has to come out of the mud to be able to take the sun. And we can talk of the rose. So these are all pictures of an inner reality of the possible birth, the spiritual birth in ourselves. And the question we can ask is, yes, but we are all linked to the spirit. No, we are linked to our individual spirit. So if we talk of the body, the soul, and the spirit, this is an individual, closed world. So only if that divine force is born in the center of the being, has that person the link with the universal spirit, with a spirit that has no boundaries, no frontiers. So we want to present another way of putting it with a picture, a diagram. We have in our very center life. This is the rose of the heart, and it is the geometrical center of a small universe in which you and I live, exist. So when Katja introduced this evening and said, but the kingdom of God is closer than hands and feet, I understood her to say that there is that central point of life in our being, and that we, you and I, find ourselves in that eternal being, so in the small universe, which we can call a microcosm, but which today is not vibrating in the spirit. Because around our being, we can find many, 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 many energies and forces. We can call it the zodiac. We can call it our thoughts and emotions. So this is our internal prison in which we find ourselves. So is there no hope? Are we just closed in a system that is also closed? So we would like to introduce to you our being, our personality. You remember the diagram which we presented. Esoteric tradition talks of 4 bodies. You may say, yes, I know my physical body. Well, I think the doctors who are here will say we hardly know our physical body, maybe 0.5%, not more. But it's a marvelous system. It's a system which is not only physical, but it is also etheric, it is also astral and also mental. So we see 4 bodies that make up you and me. And also, when you say, but I have my consciousness, I think, I know, but where is this consciousness? And all the Gnostic tradition explains that, in fact, we have 3 levels of consciousness. It is to be found in the area of the head, in and around our heart, and in the pelvic sanctuary. And if you analyze yourselves, and if we look at ourselves, sometimes we think something, but we feel something else. Sometimes I want to do something, but my thinking says I should not. And so on and so on. Hundreds of examples. And if we look at ourselves, we see this happening day in and day out. And what is happening? It's the relationship between those 3 levels of consciousness. So maybe it'll be important to create a balance between the 4 bodies and the 3 levels of consciousness. And what does that mean? It means a balance between the square and the triangle, and therefore they will find themselves in a revivified circle. And what you see here is in fact the symbol of the universal brotherhood, in which that whole structure of man is shown symbolically. And another symbol which we would like to introduce today is the tree of life. You see that this tree is turned upside down because the energy and the vibration that has to enter into us for the spiritual path doesn't come from below upwards, but from above downwards. And this tree of life exists as vibration, as energy, and therefore we can live from that tree of life. And to be able to live from the fruits of that tree of life, it is necessary to go inwards. But it's not so easy. And why is it not so easy? Because we have talked of our own individual prison, we have talked about the astral world, and we've tried to present that in this picture. So not only that there are millions of people who are caught up in their own individual prisons, but also in the prison of nationalism, patriotism, materialism, religion, and so on and so on. And we could see that in terms of a pollution around and in humanity. But then we said that each human being has the possibility to be reborn of the divine. And when that happens, that individual begins a particular path, and he breaks through these clouds, and she will necessarily find a community of others who are undertaking this path of light. But they do not escape, because they are here in this world, and their task and their work is to bring light into the darkness of those clouds, until every single carrier of light will also experience the light. Any idea of escaping is egocentric. And that's why it is said to be in the world, but not of the world. So in the world, but not of the world, but for the world.
Но за света.
And here we have another picture, and then I hope we can have an exchange. The spiritual world exists, and the temporal world exists, and they interpenetrate each other. They are here and now at this very moment. But what depends on the link we have is our consciousness. A new consciousness with a new life will have a link between the temporal world and the spiritual world. And we asked ourselves the question about mystery schools or schools of initiation. And we can see that these mystery schools or initiation schools create the link between the temporal world and the spiritual world. And of course, through the teachings, so through the word, but also through a transformation field, morphogenic field that links the spiritual world with the temporal world. And the community that belongs to that transformer acts as an intermediary then between the spiritual world and the temporal world. So it is a center of radiation and a place where, in a group, that community can move more and more into that spirit consciousness. So our answer this evening is yes, it is possible to go the spiritual path. But we would like to add and underline that we're saying it is an absolute necessity, because it is only when people discover the light that they can transmit the light. We're not talking of religion, we're not talking of books, we're talking of a life's practice of listening to the force of eternity in the heart. So we would like to go back to this slide, possibly, or any other aspect of our presentation, to be able to exchange and to discuss together. So the moment has come to hear your reactions, your responses, any points you would like to raise. We have a very active internet site and sites, and where you can also enter into exchange and into webinars and so on. We thank you very much for your attention, and we hope that now, if there are any comments or questions, it's the moment we can have an exchange.
Много ви благодарим за вашето внимание и ако има някакви въпроси или коментари, може да ги обсъдим заедно.
Thank you so much for your question.
Много благодарим за въпроса.
So we find this inner tension. We find even inner conflict, because we aspire to something perfect, or we're aspiring to the truth, to light. And then we choose different practices. It could be yoga, as you mentioned, or any other different practices which you can call spiritual or not. But what is happening inside of us? It is the eternal energy, it is the eternal force that is pushing us to seek and pushing us to find solutions. And you could say the best thing to do is to go and live in a cave or an ashram, or just close yourself at home, which is the normal reaction of someone confronted with the light. And then you say, how can we find a balance? A balance between spirituality and reality. So we see that the whole of life is made of polarity. And sometimes we go in one direction, sometimes we go in another direction. And that's great. And that's marvelous, because then something is happening in us. Because if nothing happens in us, then basically we're dead. And life is continual polarity, both in the temporal world, which we try to describe, and also in the spiritual world. So a balance depends on our motivation. If the motivation is for the I, for the egocentric being, you may find it for some time, and then life will again break up your illusion. And it's not only one moment, there may be many moments of life like that. So the polarity we are experiencing is something vital to be able to not have any illusions about oneself and about existence. But then you say, I come into my normal life and I meet with people who don't understand me. I meet with people where I have conflict. Who's guilty? Both are guilty. Not saying they are wrong, they are unpleasant, but what is happening in my way of being that I provoke that reaction and action from others. Now, if we go deeply into our own being and listen to the voice of eternity, then that voice of eternity will gradually be able to influence our life in terms of vibration, in terms of the atmosphere we have around us. And maybe the conflicts, misunderstandings, and tensions which we have created will gradually disappear. Because as we are responsible for our own prison, we are also responsible for our own heaven. And a person who goes a spiritual path, listening to the voice of the silence, breathing in that energy and force, will change the world around him or her. And then the balance will be found on a certain level. And then you come to another disbalance on another level. Firstly, it may be on the level of the personality. And then once that is overcome, it may happen on the level of the soul. And that is life. But life as a spiral going upwards from joy to joy, and not a circle of continual misunderstanding, of confusion, of reincarnation after reincarnation. So polarity is normal. But let us not blame others for our condition, because we are all in the same boat. And it's only when you are able to listen to the voice of silence in you, there is a vertical opening that takes place in one's head, in one's heart, and in one's life. But it's still a polarity. So please, anybody else? Any other elements, questions, points of view?
Някой друг да има въпроса, да?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. I don't think it was a crazy question.
No, it's not crazy. I mean, it's not.
Много благодаря, не мисля, че беше някакъв...
It's not a normal question.
Но пък не е някакъв ненормален въпрос, но пък не е нормален.
But it's...
Не е ненормален, но не е нормален.
He said that, but I agree. Yeah, and I was thinking when you were talking that if I take this glass of water or something else, another object, and I put it next to the light, it'll throw a shadow. So the shadow is in fact related to the light. But if you're looking only at the shadow and working with the energies of the shadow, then you forget about the light, because it is light which is omnipresent. And there are two trees that we want to talk about. There's the tree of knowledge. Of what? of good and evil. So that is an important element of spiritual consciousness, to be aware of that tree of good and evil. And we have to go through that tree of good and evil to be able to enter into contact with the tree of life. And I think that's linked to the same type of question as the lady before. And maybe the whole thing is to turn everything the other way around. So there is darkness if you concentrate on darkness, and one stays in that prison. But if you experience the light in your heart, then that brings that necessary change where that tree will become the tree of life. And then we have to say, we are all magicians. And are you a magician of the light or not? And the magician of the light doesn't work for himself or herself, but knows that this world is full of suffering, full of spiritual ignorance, which creates all the wars and conflicts that we see on the planet. So therefore, it's changing that by changing ourselves, by a new state of consciousness. So the egocentric will be turned around and go outwards into the world. And it's possible to do that where you live, where you work, which family you come from. That's the past, or that's the reality. But it's not the essential. So it's not escaping, it's assuming. Do you understand that? Yeah? To assume the responsibility, to take on the responsibility of being a carrier of the light. So then you become a knight of the light. And then you meet with others who may have gone through those experiences or are going through those experiences, because it's the experience of recognizing the eternal in the temporal. Because the eternal is not to be found after death. It's not to be found in some mystical elevation, but by living our life completely, honestly. So to be a just person in that respect. And then you're not creating any violence. And this world is full of violence. And it's not words or congresses or meetings which will change that, but people who practice non-violence with understanding and with love. And maybe that's where we can close this evening, thanking you for the time that you have taken to be in touch with the Golden Rosy Cross. And wherever you are on this incredible spiral of life, we wish you well from heart to heart.
Ние ви желаем всичко най-добро от сърце, към вашето сърце.
Thank you.